All right, and we're live. Welcome back to another episode of Chatting with Nuts. This is episode number 41 and my first ever Sunday night special edition. And I had to get the man, the myth, the legend himself on the show tonight. And that's why we're here on Sunday night, because I wanted to make it work. And that is my good friend, Brian Lee Durfee. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. We've been chatting for about 10 minutes prior, and I can already tell this is going to be a lot of fun. I watch a lot of your videos. Obviously, you have the greatest YouTube video actually ever made, for people who are not aware, and that is the Redwall review. It is the greatest YouTube video. Like, if they did like a YouTube flashback over the years, if that wasn't included, I'd riot. I would try to cancel my YouTube Premium, because I've never read Redwall, but you've ruined it for me because I could never read it now. Because
well, it's because, that review, I wasn't criticizing the books. I was criticizing myself for not understanding the books. I hope that was clear in the review, because I couldn't, well, you'd have to watch the review to get the whole effect of it. But I was like, I didn't know if these little animals, and it's a children's book, and it confused me. That's ridiculous. I was lost. I'm like, are these animals, are they tiny? I didn't understand, because it was full of contradictions. Sometimes they're tiny little animals riding around on hay carts that are the size of, to the animals, like just, giant things. And then other times it's like they're riding on hay carts that they're the size of the mice. I was lost. A child's book was the most difficult thing I've ever read.
Yeah, forget Malazan, forget R. Scott Baker. It was Redwall.
It was Redwall. Was the one that just, I'm like, I need someone here to guide me through this. I don't get it. Are they tiny? Are the animals tiny? Or are they human-sized? I didn't know.
When you're talking about the relation of size between like them and the inn, and you're like, is it a normal inn?
Yes. Well, because the little mice are catching fish like trout, and I'm like, are they little trout? Are they regular? Because if a mouse catches an actual trout, that's like the size of a whale to a mouse. But yet they're packing the baskets of trout on their backs, and I'm like, how is this? Are they teeny trout too? Or is everything teeny, or is some of it? Because then other things show up that appear to be normal size. I decided, I came up with the theory that it actually was about people cosplaying in furry outfits.
Oh, it's a covert furry endorsement.
Yes.
I mean, you might have some people.
But then it never got weird. It never got weird. It never went into the furry weirdness, It
just stayed with the wholesomeness of being a furry.
Yeah. So then I was like, well, it might not be furries, because I've seen videos. Well, anyway, we won't get into that.
I wanted to see you review those videos. That's what I want.
I should. That would be great. Brian Lee Durfee reviews weird porn videos.
Yeah. I would definitely thumbs up and comment and subscribe and all of the YouTube jargon for that.
It's probably not going to happen.
I just wonder if there's listeners right now and they're like, I love Redwall. It's a furry endorsement. Am I a furry? Like, are they putting the pieces together?
Redwall is nothing but people dressed in as mice and squirrels. Like little mascots. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh my God. Yeah, I gotta tell you, I don't know if you know this, but it is kind of like a cult classic, that video, because again, I hadn't seen Redwall, so I said, I won't watch a review for it yet, but people are like, no, you have to watch it. And it seems like anytime I'm in comments or I'm on Discords and your name comes up, the Redwall video is right there. It's legendary.
Well, I also reviewed the second book too, which went even further off the rails, because there was even more confusing stuff in the second book. And so that one even got, I think that one's called Mossflower. I should probably review book 3 soon and see if I can't get my shit together enough to figure out what's going on in those books.
There was someone who actually mentioned that they felt like your book 2 review was just as good. So that yeah, they said Moss 5 the sequel review is just as good. So everyone is anxiously awaiting the 3rd book review, I think.
Eventually I'll review all of them.
So is it safe to say you don't script your book reviews?
I don't. And that's been a problem too in a few reviews. There is one review that I'm kind of embarrassed, and I keep it up because I got every single detail of the book wrong somehow, and it was a book I had just read, and like I had a guy that was married to his sister, but I thought I was talking about his wife, but I was using his sister's name, and I thought that, and I said that the book, if you want to watch the review, it's Nevada by Zane Grey. Okay. And there's nothing funny in the review at all, except for all the comments where people are like, what the hell are you talking about? None of this stuff happened. Like, he didn't go to Arizona. He went somewhere else. I was like, I could have swore he went to Arizona. He was about a gunslinger. Who,
I like gunslingers.
Yeah, it's a Western. And every single detail I got wrong. And so after that, I started like taking notes as I would read, just for the reviews. So I would at least get correctly which characters were married to which characters, so I didn't accidentally say that someone was married to a sister for the whole book. And but I've left the review up just as a reminder to myself to you know, not screw it up so bad. The screw ups though are the funny thing.
Yeah, and you know, I think one of the reasons why I love watching your channel, and I've also enjoyed your books, is like you're pretty raw and you're pretty authentic. And I think that goes a long way because, you know, YouTube, all of this social media stuff, it's very performant, and people do things just to do them. Whereas whenever I'm watching a video from you, it's you. And, you know, I've talked to you before the live. You're the same person on and off air. And I think that's like one of the most endearing qualities about you.
Oh, well, thanks. Now, when I first started doing the booktube, there was about a half a dozen of my Stephen King book reviews where I tried to do some special effects in the background. I don't know if you ever watched any of those, but
I don't think I've seen these.
It's worse. Did you ever see that movie Ed Wood?
I have not.
But it's about that old time filmmaker that made science fiction movies in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, but his special effects were just like a starship like flying through but you could see the wire that it was flying on, like in the film, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I was trying to do some stuff like that to make it seem like my library was haunted. Like, so I was doing these Stephen King reviews of these horror novels, and I had weird stuff flying around in the background, right? Like like stuff on my shelf would move and slowly move across the shelf during the video, or some of my Funko Pops would start dancing, and it was just bizarre stuff. And but it's goofy. You can see the wires. You can totally tell that I've got a string in my hand and I'm like a puppet master with all this stuff in the background. Pretend I did that for about 6 videos, and they're still up there. I mean, but the worst one was my review for Insomnia, where I thought I'm going to do some acting. I'm going to pretend like I'm falling asleep as I'm doing the book review. Okay? So I pretended to fall asleep 3 different times. And I was practicing these pratfalls because I love physical comedy. And like Kramer on Seinfeld was one of my favorite physical comedy actors, and I just like physical comedy. And so I was like, I'm going to do some physical comedy in this Stephen King Insomnia review. And so I set up like candles, and I was going to fall asleep and like fall into the candles, and I was going to fall face forward into the shelves. And I did all of it, but it doesn't look like I'm falling asleep. It just looks like I'm throwing myself around the room like a crazy person. So if you want to see a video that's funnier than Redwall, look at my review of Insomnia by Stephen King. And there's a couple times where I pretend to fall asleep. And it just goes ass over teapot real fast. And I almost burnt my house down because I fell asleep and I had I fell asleep into the candles and I knocked the candles over. But that was going to be part of the prank, just, hey, he fell asleep and collapsed into the middle of all the candelabras. You have to watch it.
I'm crying because I just love, like, I almost burnt my house down, but that was like kind of part of the bit, like there's an insurance claim. It's a whole thing,
It's so stupid. And the fact that I like it so much more because it went so bad that my acting was so awful that
it's so bad.
Oh, I've had people watch it. I've showed it to people and they're crying. They're laughing so hard. They're like and there are people that in the comment section that are like, I was enjoying this review and then it got really weird.
Oh my God.
So there's a few hidden gems in my Stephen King reviews, and I've done probably about 50 of them now. So just go watch all 50, and you will find about half a dozen that are just bizarre, with weird special effects, really bad acting on my part.
Or maybe it was great.
Yeah.
What is your favorite Stephen King book?
The Stand.
Nice. I feel like The Stand gets the slight nowadays. People, I'm a fan of 11/22/63, Pet Sematary and stuff, but I just read it this year for the first time, like all the way through. And I got to say, I think I like The Stand a little bit more. There's something about the journey of The Stand that I just really resonate with.
Yeah, it's cool. It's just, it's got everything I like about a book in a book.
Yeah. And Stephen King's your favorite author, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Because you love Stephen King, and then me and you connect over to the fact that we both love Tad Williams. We're both huge Tad Williams fans.
Tad Williams was when I was young. I read a lot of fantasy books as a kid, but it wasn't until I read Tad Williams that I really started to appreciate how words fit together in a sentence, and how different words sounded as you read them aloud in a sentence, and how they sort of, if you strung a bunch of really good words together, it could create prose that was like poetic. Yeah. He was the first writer that ever did that to me, and I had read hundreds of fantasy and science fiction and westerns before I even knew who Tad Williams was. And I remember I bought his Dragonbone chair I think the day it came out, because I had read a magazine article about it, and so I knew when it was coming out. So I bought it, and just from the opening sentence, I was like, oh my gosh, this is on a different level. The writing is on a different level. This is something else. And I got to meet Tad. Well, I have the same literary agent as Tad Williams. Oh. When I tried to get my book deal, I focused on all the literary agents in New York that did really big fantasy novels, like George R.R. Martin's agent and Brandon Sanderson's agent, Pat Rothfuss' agent, Tad Williams' agent, anybody, Steven Erickson's agent, all of them. I just figured out who those guys were because I knew my books were probably going to be pretty big. And so I'm like, hey, I did epic fantasy, big stuff, but I ended up signing with the same agent that represents Tad Williams. And my agent introduced us, and I hung out with Tad for a couple days in Salt Lake City when he was in town. And that was cool to meet my literary hero, right?
Yeah.
And I remember we didn't really talk about books that much. We talked about other things. But I do remember Tad and my agent and me were at a restaurant, and I'd finally decided I was gonna trot my collection of books out and have Tad sign them, right? Like I had a whole trunk full of them in my car, and I'm like, hey, I got a bunch of books in my car. Can you sign them? And so we started talking about his books, and I remember I quoted like the entire first paragraph of that Dragonbone Chair to him, and I could just see that he was delighted that somebody could do that, like quote his own book back to him like that, you know?
Yeah, probably meant the world to him.
Yeah, and it was cool. And then he ended up reading my books, and you'll notice on book 2, The Blackest Heart, he even did a little blurb for me. So
yeah, my eyes immediately picked up on that, and it made me so happy because I had seen you talk about him on your channel, and I didn't know that he did the endorsement, you know, the front cover endorsement. And then I see it, and I was like, man, I bet you that was pretty amazing for Brian, and obviously it was. And yeah, you have Memory Star and Thorn as your number 2 fantasy series of all time, right? Right behind Lord of the Rings.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And then he also has Shadow March, which made your top 40. That is one I have not read. You know, I've heard of people talk about Otherland, but I feel like Shadow March kind of gets doesn't get a lot of like publicity. A lot of people don't talk about it.
Well, funny you mentioned Shadow March because I just finished rereading it for the 3rd time about a week ago, and I filmed the video for it on Friday. So it should I will have a review of Shadow March up next week sometime.
Nice. I will.
I can't remember what day I scheduled it. I can't remember what day I scheduled it for. But just so people know, I usually film all my videos on Friday mornings. Like I'll film 7. And then that way they're kind of queued up every day, 1 per day for a week. And then Friday again, I'll film 7 more. So that's kind of the way I do it.
You do them in batches.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't film one every day. I release one every day on the YouTube, but I film them all on Friday mornings.
Yeah, you have such a wild release schedule. Like I can count on a Brian Lee Durfee video pretty much any day of the week, which is great because people love your reviews and love your channel.
And I always upload them at 7 a.m. They're scheduled for upload 7 a.m. Utah time every day, so which would be like 9 o'clock Eastern time, probably.
Yep.
And I for a week I bumped them back because I thought 7 a.m. was too early, so I bumped them back to like 10. And oh my gosh, the comments! I watch your videos every day at the breakfast table, and I'm like, oh, I guess I better go back to the regular schedule. So I did.
And so when do you do all the editing? That's something that Bald BookTuber does now. Yeah, all that
never edited one single book, a single edit. Are you talking about editing on my videos or editing on my books?
Your videos.
I've never edited one thing in a video ever.
You're kidding.
No. Okay, so the one thing that I edited into a video, and I've only edited one thing into a video ever, and it was a project, and I was nervous because I didn't know if I could do it. But I just did it I film out all the videos on my phone, first of all. I don't have a camera or a microphone. I mean, you got a big old mic. You're all set up like a pro.
Yeah, I'm an idiot.
You probably even have like a good sound system too. Well, clearly you do. You have a microphone sticking in your face, a headset even.
Big old arm, you know, I'm a nerd. What can I do?
No,
you know?
I've got right now my phone is propped up on a bunch of books, and the cat will knock it over at some point during this show. But no, I was editing. I wanted to do a cover reveal for Lonesome Crown, but I didn't have a physical cover that I could hold up to the camera. Like that's what I would normally do is here's the cover. I got a physical copy and I'd hold it up to the camera, right? I didn't have I just had a digital. And I was even thinking of going to Kinko's and just printing out a digital Xerox copy of it so I wouldn't have to edit anything. But I'm like, okay, no, that would be stupid because I'm sure it wouldn't do the cover justice because it was a really cool cover, right?
Great.
And so I figured out how to put a still shot of the cover on this side of the camera, like that, and then my face could still be on the other. See, I can't even do it. I can't even do it. You know what I'm talking about?
You went through a lot of trouble to show off that beautiful cover.
Yes.
Yeah.
And but it worked. I ended up figuring out how, and I just did the editing on my phone. But yeah, so a couple of years, so I was gonna start buying some professional equipment for my YouTube channel, and because I went about a year, and I was like, I should probably step up my game, right? And I should probably get like a real camera and use an actual computer and edit things, and get a sound system and lighting and all that stuff. And so I went online to buy some of this stuff, and the only thing that I bought was a little camera holder that I could put on the dashboard of my car. That's the only thing I bought. And so then I started filming stuff in my car as I was driving. I was filming writing advice and book reviews in my car driving around Salt Lake City, because I had bought a piece of equipment for my channel, the thing for my and anyway.
I sold
the car. I sold the car and forgot that that was attached to the dashboard, and
no,
off it went.
No. The only piece of equipment that you ever bought for the channel, and it's gone.
It got, yeah. I forgot to, when I sold the car, I cleaned everything out of the car except for that, and then I get in my new car and I'm getting ready to film, and I'm like, oh, crap.
And that was that.
That's that. Yeah.
I do love your videos when you post, whether they're shorts or whatever. Whenever you show off some of Salt Lake in Utah, and you've also done some videos inside of Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
I like the one where you accidentally bought the same book from, or the same author in 3 different books. It was like a Tom Clancy one, and then a Western, and then I think maybe a thriller or something. And it just so happened you picked an author that did all 3, and you had no idea.
Yeah, he was writing under 3 different names, and I ended up he ended up seeing that video, and we ended up doing one of these. I did one of these with him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's
he set it up. Yeah, he was the one that set it up, and it's Mark Cameron, and he writes some of the Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan novels, and he writes a series of thrillers of his own, and then he wrote a series of Western novels under a different name. And it was crazy because I had just picked up those 3 books in the bookstore and read the bio and realized this is the same dude.
I mean, your taste is consistent, right? Because you were like, oh, I like all 3 of these.
Yeah.
It's very cool. It's a good story to meet a new friend, right? That's awesome.
Yeah, but he saw the video and he thought it was cool, so he reached out to me and we became friends. And he's from Alaska, and I grew up in Alaska, so we had that connection. He's also a retired police officer, and I worked in law enforcement most of my life, and so we had that in common. So
that's a good match, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know you grew up in Alaska. So how did you end up how did you end up where you're at now?
Well, I was born in Las Vegas, which is, I'm pretty sure the reason the Oakland Raiders moved to Las Vegas was in honor of my birth.
I did read that somewhere.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's why they moved to Vegas. But when I was a little kid, my parents moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, for job reasons, and that's where I grew up for the most part. And then when I was teenage years, we moved to Utah, to Sevier County, Utah. And if you've never heard of Sevier County, don't feel bad. Nobody's heard of Sevier County. I mean, it's in the middle of the southern Utah in the desert. I used to think of it like Luke Skywalker thought of Tatooine. If there's a center to the universe, Sevier County is the furthest place from it. I mean, it's remote. People don't drive through Sevier County on way to another destination. There's no like major highways. It's like you have to have a reason to go to Sevier County to end up there, right?
Hmm.
And so we moved from Fairbanks to Sevier County, and I ended up in Utah there, and went to high school in Sevier County, South Sevier High. And then as soon as I turned 18, I couldn't wait to get out of Sevier County, and I've lived to several places. I've lived in Connecticut. I've lived in New York, Rhode Island, Salt Lake City.
What was your favorite one out of all of them?
I don't know. Sometimes I think I'd like to, when I retire, just move back to Alaska. Most people move to Florida or Arizona. I go to Alaska. I've liked something about all of them, you know. Even Sevier County. My parents still live down there, and even, you know, as much as I hated that as a kid, I mean, Sevier County was like so remote and so distant from everything and so small. You know, my high school only had like 60 people in it, my graduating class.
Oh wow.
And that was pulling kids from all over the county too. You know, some of those kids had to drive a long way just to get to high school. And it was a farming community, it was a coal mining community. And I hated it as a kid, but you know, when I go back to visit my parents, it's kind of peaceful.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, you see the allure to it.
Yeah, you know, something you hate that you kind of enjoy going back and seeing as an adult. I don't think I'd live there, but
do you feel like the line between love and hate is pretty thin?
oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big fan of just hearing that. I love mixed martial arts, and Nick Diaz is one of my favorite fighters from back in the day. And he's like, I hate fighting. And people are like, well, why do you do it? He's like, because I love it. And he's like, you can't love this without hating it. And I do think that in a lot of circumstances
Yeah.
that line is very, very thin.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can see it in relationships all the time.
Yeah.
With people.
So
Some
true.
people equate the drama that comes with the that whole love hate back and forth, you know. If you meet someone and they really really hate their ex, they still kind of love them.
Yeah, they're not done. They're
Yeah,
not
and
done yet.
because if they're doing nothing but talking about how awful their ex was,
Mm-hmm.
they're still invested in it. The
Yes.
moment you know someone's completely done with a relationship is when they're indifferent and apathetic and don't care. They just stop talking about it. That's when you know they're done.
Yeah, apathy is almost a bigger statement than anything. And you know, even books, right? Like when someone loves a book or hates a book, they got a lot to say. But the worst feeling I can ever feel towards a book is apathy. If I feel apathy towards a book, something just feels wrong. I'm like,
Yeah.
could have read something else. You know, it doesn't happen too often, but you know, there's such strong opinions in one way or the other, you're going to talk about it. And it's an
Yeah.
emotion, and it's a strong emotion. And I feel that a little bit too. You know, I told you before we went live, like I moved away from West Virginia, and there's a lot of things I don't like about West Virginia. But when I go back and visit my parents, and I go to my really small town, actually they live in southwestern PA, which is like right over the line from West Virginia. It's the whole thing. But when I go back, yeah, I kind of get it, and I'm kind of thankful that I grew up in such a small place. Sometimes.
Yeah. After living here in Salt Lake City for the last 20 years, I'm kind of tired of the city, you know. And Salt Lake, it's not even a real big city, you know.
Yeah.
3 million people or something like that. It's not like huge, but it's big enough that it has all the city problems, you know. Traffic, crime, congestion. I go down to Sevier County, and like I can see the stars at night. There's no traffic noise. Yeah, it's just really peaceful, you know.
Do you find yourself being drawn to that type of place whenever you're writing?
In what way do you mean?
So, like, where's your favorite place to write?
Oh, I write in my writing studio here, which I'm sitting in, and I put headphones on. Sometimes I just crank the stereo. I write whenever I'm writing. I probably have 1,000 CDs, classic rock CDs that I've been collecting since I was a kid. I still have them, and I play those. I mean, I don't have an iPod. I don't have any sort of digital music files stored anywhere. I still just listen to those old CDs, and they're classic rock. Everything from Kiss to Guns N' Roses to Fleetwood Mac to anything that was classic rock. And I listen to it as I write. I listen to it with the volume turned up to 10. It's loud. I mean, it's really loud.
It sounds loud.
But every word of my books has been written in that environment.
I've often described your channel and your books as heavy metal fantasy.
Yeah.
And I stick to that, and I like it more and more every time I think about it. That's very fitting.
Yeah, I mean, I need to have a lot of people write to music, and I've had a lot of writers say I like writing to music, but there can't be any singing in it. There can't be any lyrics or words. It has to be like Celtic music or movie soundtracks or Bach or Beethoven or Mozart or something. And I'm like, no, I listen to Rush turned up loud. I listen to John Cougar Mellencamp turned up loud. I listen to everyone. I mean, I've got if it's a classic rock artist, I probably have their CDs.
Yeah. Did you ever get down with some Dokken back in the day?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
I've got Dokken CDs in my yeah.
Yeah, me and my dad used to listen to Dokken all the time. I love that band.
In my dreams, I could sing it right now. In my dreams, I won't do it. I won't bother with it.
No, go ahead, belt it out. We'll start a band right now.
That's in my dreams. That's the only Dokken song that comes to mind right now. But I know there's it's not love. That's one. No, that's the lyric. It's not love. I might be way off. I could be singing something else.
This might be like a book review.
I like Dokken.
Yeah, I was a big Dokken fan. I was a big Ozzy fan. I love Diary of a Madman. I actually just love that album. I think that song's fantastic, but that whole album is pretty incredible. Yeah. Kind of has a story to it, has a theme. It's Diary of a Madman itself is a great story in that song. And Randy Rhoads has an excellent solo in it. I think it's cool. I think it's cool that you pull from music. I wrote a short story last year, and the entire premise of it came to me while listening to Hail to the King by Avenged Sevenfold. And I just kept listening to it on repeat. And I just kept thinking about a king making one last stand. What if Robert Baratheon picked up the Warhammer one last time? You know what I mean? Yeah. Smash some Lannister's skulls in. That's kind of what I was thinking when I wrote that story. So I see why so many people pull inspiration from music. I think Steven Erikson also told me that he also enjoyed listening to music that had, I think, words. I think he as well had lyrics. Because I know Brandon Sanderson listens to, I think, instrumentals and stuff. He doesn't listen to words. So it's always interesting when I hear someone say that they actually listen to lyrics. And do you think that you've ever slipped up maybe osmosis and put some lyrics in a book?
I'm wearing a Stevie Nicks shirt.
Nice.
I'm not going to admit to it, but there may or may not be a couple of 2 or 3 words strung together in my books that are probably originally written by Stevie Nicks.
Okay, some Easter eggs for all the 5-word Angel fans out there. You have some homework to do now.
Yeah, so it'd be really hard to find too. And it's just usually a couple of I won't take a whole lyric of hers and put it in a book. Yeah. But sometimes she'll have a couple of words strung together, and I like it. The other thing that I probably shouldn't admit to is
oh no.
So the first ever rock and roll album that I ever purchased, well, it was back then it was a cassette tape. The first ever album I purchased with my own money was REO Speedwagon High Infidelity. And so for a couple of years of my life, REO Speedwagon was the only band I listened to. And I was really young. And so the band, those 5 original band members, there are variations of those guys and their names in the 5 Warrior Angels. So if you're a fan of REO Speedwagon, and there is an Amazon reviewer that spotted it.
Nice.
I mean, I didn't use their names directly as they spell them in real life. I switched it a little bit, but yeah, there are some names of characters and some places on the map that are the names that are sort of pulled from the 5 original REO Speedwagon guys. I don't know if that's illegal to do. I don't know what if it's on that.
Well, when we're in court, we'll pull up this footage and we'll reflect on how big of a mistake this all was and how it all came crashing down on us. And I think it's cool. I think it's neat.
Yeah, and the Stevie Nicks lyrics, like I said, it's just there's some words in her. I think she writes very poetic songs, and there's some words that she's used in her songs that I'm like, oh, that's a great word. I'm going to use that somewhere in my book. So it's not like I'm lifting lyrics from her. I've lifted words out of her that I wouldn't have normally thought of. Yeah.
Sometimes people even put something a certain way and makes it a total topic or something, have a different frame of mind. And that happens to me all the time. It can even be the simplest statement, but it's just worded in a certain way that makes you think about it differently. And you're like, how did they do that?
Yeah.
Lucas has a question for you. It says, what is Brian's favorite Rush album?
Oh, gosh, I've got the collector's edition boxes that probably the latest one that they came out with. Was it Clockwork something?
Bald Booktuber says the answer should be 2112.
Well, that's good. I honestly like their later stuff more than their 1970s stuff. So and 80s stuff. I like the stuff they produced lately. And I think was it called Clockwork Angels? I can't remember what it was called. It was the most recent one they did, though.
Someone tell us in chat. We need the Rush sleuths on this.
I could be way off. But I do have the collector's box. There's 3 collector's boxes that have all of their albums in it. It's a really nice collector's edition.
Nice. You have a museum of physical art and media at your house. I feel like you could probably register your house as a museum at this point, right?
Oh, probably, yeah. That's the thing, is I collect everything. Like, I don't do digital stuff. I hate ebooks. Sorry for people out there that love their e-readers, and I don't like digital music. I don't like digital films. If I want to watch Game of Thrones, I buy the DVD or the Blu-ray set and have a physical copy. And I've done that for everything. I don't subscribe to Hulu or Netflix or HBO or any of that. I'll just get physical copies of the stuff I want. And I've watched a lot of stuff, but I'm looking over there at my one bookshelf that's just nothing but DVDs of like Battlestar Galactica, Deadwood, Rome.
Oh, Deadwood's so good.
Boardwalk Empire, Breaking Bad, Mad Men. I'm rewatching Mad Men now. And I walk on the treadmill for an hour every day, and I watch a different episode of something. As I'm walking, I watch an episode of something.
Now, will you subscribe to Netflix or HBO once 5 Warrior Angels gets picked up for a multi-season massive project?
No, I'll probably make sure that I've got a friend that's subscribed, and then we'll use their house as a party house and watch it there every week.
I'll tell you what, you're invited over anytime you want. If you want to make the flight out every week, I'll be more than happy to host you.
I mean, that's how I watch a lot of them. Is like all the Star Wars, like Obi-Wan and the Mandalorian and Boba Fett and Andor. I've got a friend that I go to their house and watch that stuff.
Nice.
Because they've got the Disney subscription.
Hey, if it turns it into a social event, I think that's actually a lot of the fun nowadays. You know, I mean, I know we all talk about it online, but there is something about experiencing something in person with somebody that can be really special. I went with a coworker to the last Disney Star Wars movie that everyone hated. And I didn't feel any certain way about the movie, to be honest, because I'm not that invested in Star Wars. But that night, I had a great time. And like that movie now, when I think of that movie, I think about hanging out with my friend Eric. And you know, that's not something you get if you just tweet about it and someone tells you you're stupid online, right? It's different.
Yeah.
Jonathan Kennedy has a good question. He says, Brian, do the inmates at your prison enjoy your series? Are they eagerly awaiting the final book?
Yes. So right now at the prison, for the last couple of years, I've been teaching life skills to the inmates, like anger management, thinking for a change. I've done creative writing. I've done a few things. But before that, for about 5 years, I ran all the prison libraries. I was the sergeant in charge of the prison libraries. And at the Utah State Prison, which is a big prison, it's got like 6,000 inmates. We had like about 6 different libraries, and I was in charge of all of them. And then before that, I was a sergeant in the gang unit. I was an officer in the mental health unit. So I've spent a lot of time at the prison. And when I first got published, I was going to sort of keep it on the down low. I didn't want the inmates to know. Man, that was my initial thought, you know. I don't want anybody. I don't want my private life. I don't want them to know anything about it, right? And I did for about 5 or 6 months. And then there were different officers that had taken my book into the prison and were reading it, like on the graveyard shift when they've got nothing else to do. They'll just be reading a book, and then the inmates will always, if you work at a prison, the inmates always are studying what you're doing. They are hyper focused on, because they've got nothing better to do than see what the prison guards are up to.
Yeah.
And if you've got a book in your hand and there's an inmate around, the inmate's going to be like, "Hey, officer, what you reading?" And the officers were like, "Oh, I'm reading Sergeant Durfee's book." And they're like, "Durfee wrote a book?" "Yeah." And they'll look at it and they'll be like, "Get the fuck out. Durfee wrote a book? That's ridiculous. How that guy wrote a book?" Yeah. And so then after a while, all the inmates were coming up to me and being like, "Hey man, we've seen your book. Officer so-and-so had it in the chapel. I mean, hey man, we've seen your book. Officer so-and-so had it in the infirmary." And I'm like, and it became, and they're like, "We want to read it. We want to read it." And I'm like, no. And then it just became more irritating to just keep saying no than to just, I finally just brought in a bunch for all the libraries. And then the inmates started reading it. And then I became kind of a little mini celebrity at the prison, which is alarming to know that every single hardcore Crip and Blood and Sereno and Norteño and MS-13 and it has read my books in the state of Utah. Every felon has read my books. And I'm like, oh, okay, this can't end well, right? I mean, so far nothing crazy has happened. I mean, we actually before COVID, me and my friend James Dashner, who wrote The Maze Runner, put on the first ever in the history of the world prison Comic-Con, where we got all sorts of books and comic books donated to the prison libraries from publishers and comic book artists and writers. Like Brandon Sanderson donated boxes and boxes of his books. And we had a Comic-Con where we taught the inmates creative writing, and we watched all the Maze Runner movies, and we had panels that they could sit in on, and it was pretty cool. And the inmates are, I mean, you know, my opinion on it is, you know, these guys are in prison for crimes they've committed, and certainly they need to pay their price that society wants them to pay. But 99% of them are gonna get out of prison eventually.
Yeah.
And I think every one of them deserves a second chance of some sort. And so if I can just be a good influence in some way,
Yeah.
you know, that's accomplishing something, you know, whether it's if they enjoy my books or or if they, you know, if a doofus like Sergeant Durfee can write a book and get it published by Simon and Schuster, then pretty much anybody can do anything. And that's kind of what I try to teach them, right? Is nothing's out of the realm of possibilities. And when you guys get out of the prison, you got a long life ahead of you. And you know, and in my classes, I teach that. I teach that every human being is important. Doesn't matter whether you're president of the United States or if you're locked up in prison. Your opinion matters, and you're important, and you need to make good decisions, because the decisions you make affect the world in ways you have no idea. You know, some small decision you make today might change the world 100 years from now, with the butterfly effect. You know, something you say today might affect someone who affects someone who affects someone, and on down the road. And you know, maybe the cure for cancer 100 years from now is found because you did something right today. And that's what I try to teach them. The cat decided to join. So what was the question he asked, though? I went off on a tangent there.
No, I thought that was a beautiful thing to go into, and I think it's very noble. I also think you're underselling yourself just a little bit, calling yourself a doofus.
They do, the inmates do like my books. I've had a few that have said, "Wasn't for me, Sergeant Durfee. I didn't like it. Wasn't for me." And I'm like, fair enough.
Hell, that's more constructive than some of the stuff I see on BookTube.
And most of them. And then this just happened the other day. I was in the maximum security gang unit, which is where I teach. I currently teach in the maximum security gang unit. One of those inmates said, "Sorry, the cat is going to knock everything down." One of those inmates was sort of wouldn't let me leave the section because he had so many questions about the books. And it's one thing to be at a Comic-Con and have fans come up to you and just want to talk to you about your books nonstop. But it's another thing to be inside of a maximum security gang unit at a state prison and have the same experience. And you're trying to be like, I got to go, I've got things to do. And but you know, I'm glad he liked the books. I told him I appreciate your enthusiasm for my novels, but I've got to go talk to some other inmates right now.
I mean, it shows the power of literature, right? And fantasy, and it can bring all types of sorts of people together wherever they are in their life's journey. And it's important. It's really, really important.
Oh, and you have no idea. These guys, they read inside the prison. Well, they've, you know, no pun intended, but they're sort of a captive audience for, you know, for books, right? I mean, they read and read and read. I mean, they could, every single one of those guys that's a voracious, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Someone who reads a lot. Each one of those inmates that reads a lot could probably go to any Comic-Con and talk about books more intelligently than 90% of the people at that Comic-Con. Because they just, I mean, they're huge Brandon Sanderson fans. They're huge Game of Thrones fans. You know, Bernard Cornwell. Okay, so Bernard Cornwell, his Saxon Tales.
Yeah.
Those books are the hardest ones. When I was running the library, those were the hardest ones to keep in stock.
Really?
The inmates just love those Viking stories. I don't know why. And then the most stolen book out of my libraries was because yeah, the inmates will check them out and never bring them back. Yeah. Now a lot of times I would just go search their cell and find it, but sometimes they give it to anyway. Believe it or not, books get stolen from the libraries in prison. The one that got stolen the most was Swan Song by Robert McCammon.
I just read that this year.
Yeah, I could not keep copies. I would, every year I would buy 10 copies for every library, and then they would just go missing.
Huh.
They'd vanish into oblivion. But I know that they're squirreled away somewhere in that prison, you know?
I wonder what it is about that book specifically that resonates with so many people there.
I'm not sure.
It is, I mean, it is a pretty it's pretty dark. I mean, there's a lot of grim stuff that happens in that book, but I do think the overall theme of that book ends up being pretty joyful, almost too optimistic for me, actually. I kind of like The Stand a little bit more, I think. I know those get compared a lot, but I did want to highlight this comment. Runedog Valhalla, which is a sick name, says, "The Blackest Heart is my favorite book read to date. I'm so glad you were able to share the series with these inmates."
Oh, well, thank you for saying it's your favorite book to date.
Placeholder for Lonesome Crown.
Exactly.
You know, you do have your third book coming out, end of the month here, just a few weeks, which is wild. And I'd love to hear it, like how you feeling about it. You know, the writing process is done, the editing process is done, and now I assume it's the wait to see how the release goes. But I mean, what are your feelings? You're wrapping up something that you put thousands of pages into, and it's I envy you for that, and I respect you immensely for being able to put the pen to paper and make such a great story. But how are you feeling about it?
I'm not going to know how I feel about it until I get some reaction from some readers, you know.
Yeah.
I feel like it's cool. The story mostly, for the most part, turned out way better than I thought it would. But that was from the beginning, you know. I had pretty low expectations of what my talents could actually produce. And so anytime that I wrote anything that was coherent, I was just pleased. The fact that I strung together that many coherent thoughts is nothing short of a miracle. And so it all turned out way better than I thought it would, just off of that basis there. You know, it was a challenge. I'm not sure if I should have accepted such a challenge to write a massive epic fantasy it's really kind of the first thing I ever really wrote. Most people start with short stories, shorter novels. They have a lot of practice at writing. Me, I was like, I'm just gonna, you know, write a 1,000-page novel right out of the gate. That is the exact thing that every bit of writing advice you get in every book you read about how to write novels. They say, don't just vomit out words to the tune of 1,000 pages and then think that the publishers are going to be interested in your 1,000-page epic thing when they don't even know who you are. You know, start smaller. And I was like, I'm not going to listen to any of that advice. I'm gonna do it the way I want. and it worked out. It luckily worked out. I mean, I am an anomaly. I am like the exception to the rule. In fact, my editor, because I had plotted out the book to be 5 shorter books, and my editor, right from the beginning, said, I think it'll be better if we just make the books bigger and do a trilogy. And so I owe my editor a lot for talking me into that, because I actually kind of enjoy the format of these 3 huge books rather than 5, you know, smaller books.
Yeah.
And I think that it really forced me to learn story structure a little bit better, learn how to pace things a little quicker, because I could have went on and on and on and on self-indulgently, just writing a lot of different stuff to but doing sort of I didn't really shrink it, but I did kind of shrink it. I had to focus a little bit more, fitting it into 3 larger novels rather than 5 medium-sized novels. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, what I can definitely tell you is I do think your pacing is excellent, because the Forgetting Moon, the Black Starter are thick books. Like, they are thick. But they read so fast for me. Like, it's like you just blow through a couple hundred pages in an afternoon and you're just like, oh, wow, I'm halfway through this thing. And part of that is the fact that I think you have a great cast of characters. And, I told you before we went live, but I just absolutely love the names Nail and Beer Mug. I mean, there's some of my favorites. And Rune Dog says the scene in The Black's Heart where Nail and the Val, is that how you say it? Or Valet? I can officially ask you. Valle.
Oh yeah.
Are floating inside a glacier's lake. So beautifully written, such a vivid scene. And you do some fantastic scene setting. And that's something that I think I would assume that you were inspired by Robert Jordan and Tad Williams on, because I felt those vibes.
Tad Williams somewhat. No, that scene, there's only one scene in all of the books that I wrote specifically because I dreamed it, vividly dreamed it. And that was the scene where Nail and Val Draken are floating under the glacier in the street, in that pond. Well, they did. There was there was some rivers and waterfalls and a pond, and then they had to escape out from underneath the glacier that they'd fallen into. Spoiler: if you have in book 2, there's some characters that fall into a glacier. Spoiler warning. Okay, but that was that I dreamed the whole sequence. I dreamed it.
Wow.
And I put it in the book. As far as the other scenes of adventure, I wanted the book to not only did I want the characters to sort of battle against each other a lot, I also wanted them to battle against the forces of nature a lot. Because a lot of my favorite books are about, like Lonesome Dove, Shogun, Alaska by James Michener. A lot of these epic adventures, it's a lot about man versus nature,
Yeah.
Not just man versus man. So I wanted to make sure that the environment these people were traveling through was just as apt to kill them as their enemies were. That's why we got a lot of glaciers, people falling into glaciers. That's why we've got a lot of hiking through mountains during snowstorms, going into caves and caverns, adventures on the sea with like great white sharks. I wanted nature to be just as deadly as assassins could be.
Yeah, I think that goes a long way in not just scene setting, but in world building and getting people immersed in the place that they're reading about, which is one of my big things. If I can't get immersed in a world that surrounds the characters, like Stephen King does this great with random made up towns in Maine. Like, he gets me immersed in the town building. I'm like, I believe that post office exists. I believe that someone does work there and does their thing every single day. And it's something in fantasy for me to really get over the hump of something being good to great. It's whenever I feel like it's an established, tangible place that I can go visit. And I think that what you're talking about, and it being alive and it being dangerous, especially in an adventure, and you're going through all these crazy climates, of course it's dangerous. It should be. And I think that helps quite a bit with the immersion.
Yeah. World building is, I think some of my favorite compliments I've gotten from book reviewers is when they say, Durfee's, like, my books, the 5 Warrior Angel series has got world building on par with George R.R. Martin and Robert Jordan and Tad Williams. I'm like, yeah, thank you, because that's what I was aiming for, and it's tough. It's so hard to get those details right. And and initially I hadn't. I owe my literary agent some bit of credit for spotting some deficiencies in my early drafts of world building. Just, he's like, if you're going to have these people in a castle, you got to understand how castles run, how they work, what different rooms are needed for what different things, and the type of jobs that different people have in a castle. You've got people that work with the horses, you got chamberlains, you've got stable masters, you've got all these different things. And not only that, but what kind of horses inhabit a castle, or they're not all war horses. There's horses that do other jobs. Figure out what those are.
Red eye
And
horses.
and then figure out what type of clothing people wore, because so I mean, my agent was really critical in like pointing some of those things out to me. Like, you gotta step up the game. Your competition is they've stepped up their game. You can't just half-ass this. If you want to write big epic fantasy, you're gonna have to nail down the details like everybody else that writes big epic fantasy that's successful.
Yeah.
And it really did force me to sort of backtrack and fill in all those little details that I think make a world believable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like that. I like that kind of like, you got to step your game up, and you obviously rose to the challenge, because I do think your world is amazing. And I think that it's obvious that you put a lot of care into the details. Are you someone who enjoys the editing process as a writer?
I like editing way more than doing the first draft.
Okay.
The first draft, if anybody was to ever see my first drafts, they'd be like, how does this guy even consider himself a writer? I mean, because I motor through the first drafts pretty quick, and any idea that I have, no matter how outlandish, I will put it in the first draft. I will write it in there, knowing that in subsequent readings, as I'm polishing it, if those crazy ideas don't work, I can just edit them out. So I'll stick it in, right? I'll stick it all in. I think with the editing, the first draft is a struggle, because you're trying to write the story. Once the story is on paper, though, sorry, I might have to go grab a soda real quick. I'll be gone. That's fine. 1 second.
Yeah, totally fine. Go for it. Get caught up on the chat here. Fantasy Fanatic says, I'm actually waiting for the Forgetting Moon to arrive in the mail. I mean, man, I gotta tell you, Brian, you get a lot of fans. They're all out full blown in the chat here, just praising your wilderness scene, saying that some of the legendary weapons you have is reminiscent to Shannara, which is a compliment. And a lot of people are impressed with the amount of research that you've had to do. You're talking about putting all of your ideas in, and I think one of the things, because I try to write, I suck at it. But one of the things that's toughest for me is that I struggle in the first draft, because I'm like, this is just so bad. And I'm like, how do I even fix this? Like, it's just like, it's drivel. And I'm like, how do I form this into a good story? So how many passes will you take at a story?
Okay. So yeah, what I was talking about earlier was, don't worry if your first draft is garbage. Don't worry. Just get it out. Get the story out there on paper, because the magic of writing really starts to happen, at least for me, in the subsequent drafts, where you can slowly, after you read it and then reread it and then reread it, you can slowly polish everything up, add the little details that make the story sing, add those little bits of flowery prose here and there that you want. That's where all the little magical details take place, is in the editing. That's why I like the editing more. So when I wrote the Forgetting Moon, I was under no deadline. I mean, I just noodled on it here and there for like 10 years. So the amount of drafts I did were probably like 50.
Wow.
Yeah. Because I started at such a I don't know how to say this. My skill level was so bad when I started that I had to do 50 polishes to get the thing to where I thought it was good enough to submit to big time agents in New York that could get me a book deal. And I just wanted to make sure I put my best step forward, and I didn't want to send a draft that was garbage because it would just get rejected. So I really fine tuned it. And even then, like I said, my agent was still spotting things that I needed to do better. You know, still spotting. You know, he was the one that said you got to step up your game. You're a good storyteller, but you got to step up your game. And he even made me do a couple of rewrites.
Was that tough
And
for you?
the rewrites weren't like changing major scenes or plot things or character things. The rewrites were basically add more details. So this, you know, if you want to be like Tad Williams, you got to be like Tad Williams, you know? So I enjoy the editing process more because it's just the hard lifting has been done and now you're just fine tuning it. Now on The Blackest Heart, I was under a deadline, so I had to speed things up. So I probably did about 10 drafts of that total. I probably about 7, and then I sent it to my editor, and then after that we did about 3 more. But that's typical. Once your editor gets a hold of it, there's about 3 more rewrites you end up doing.
Wow.
And now in The Forgetting Moon, my editor asked me to add some things. He didn't. The only thing that he crossed off, the only thing that there was a sex scene, and he drew. It was about a page long, and he just drew a big red X through the sex scene. And the note that he put was, "Let me save you the embarrassment." And I was like, okay.
Oh, geez.
Okay, I guess that's a comment on a lot of parts of my life. Clearly, I can't write sex scenes, and maybe I'm just not good at it in general because I thought it was a pretty good sex scene. So that was the only thing that he made me get rid of, and he actually had me add stuff. In The Blackest Heart, he didn't have me change a thing. It was just the edits. The 3 edits we did were just to get rid of punctuation errors. In The Lonesome Crown, things went even quicker because now I've got 2 books under my belt and I sort of know the system. And I did 3 or 4 drafts on my own, and then I sent it to my editor. And I think we only did 2 or 3 more polishes after that.
Nice. So I mean, it's like anything. You kind of grease the wheel and you get your experience, and then things can roll. And I'm sure even your first drafts improved, right?
Yeah. So with the first book, Forgetting Moon, I went through 50 drafts. Blackest Heart went through about 10, and Lonesome Crown went through about 6. So I'm getting better. And even my editor at Simon & Schuster, he even said that book 3 was the best of the 3 as far as my writing skill had improved.
That's awesome. Do you think this is a world that you'll return to, or are we going to see something new from you? I know that you love all types of genre of fiction and even nonfiction. So is there anything else left in Five Little Angels?
Yeah, I've got ideas for well, I can't really spoil anything. There's okay, so of the characters that survive this trilogy, there's a handful of them that I wouldn't mind doing a small spin-off series with.
Okay.
And when you get to the end of Lonesome Crown, you probably will figure out which ones those are, because I sort of kind of hint that there might be more stories about those guys.
Cool.
Or girls.
Cool.
Or dogs. or
Oh,
dragons.
God.
I don't know. I mean, just saying. I'm not saying which characters it is.
Might even be the glaciers.
Yeah, yeah.
The world is a character.
Yeah.
One thing I got to ask you about, and this is, we talked about world building, right? And we talked about putting in details. You have my favorite religious themes and implementation of religion in fantasy, and in how it's perceived through the histories and what people may have gotten wrong or right or whatever it might be. And I would just love to hear you talk a little bit more about your thought process on that, and like how you incorporated that in your story and how it played off maybe your personal experiences, if that's okay.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the basis for the story, I thought of the first book I ever read, The Sword of Shannara. I read it when I was about 12, and there was a specific line about 80 pages in that when I read that line in The Sword of Shannara, I knew immediately that I wanted to be a fantasy writer and what my books would be about. Just off that one little line that a character said to another character.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of about that whole religious prophecy type of thing, that trope. And so even from a little kid, the theme was pretty settled pretty early on, that it was the conflict in my fantasy world was gonna revolve around religion. Now, I grew up as a Mormon, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and
Mm-hmm.
my parents were Mormon. I went to Mormon church as a kid. When I was 19, I went on a 2-year Mormon mission for the Mormon church. After that, I went to BYU, a Mormon-owned school. I got my degree. But then once they handed me my degree, I was done with Mormonism. I was like, I have no interest in religion anymore. Even on my mission, when I was teaching Mormonism, I don't know if I ever really quite bought into it. But when you're Mormon and you're 19 years old, you just go on a mission. That's what every young Mormon boy does.
Yeah.
So I knew what it was like to believe wholeheartedly in a religion, and that your religion was the one true religion. When you've been taught your whole life that your religion is the true one, everybody else is false. Not only that, but I spent 2 years teaching that. I mean, I bought in hook, line, and sinker. I know what it's like to be a fervent believer in something. And then I know what it's like to start to doubt those beliefs. And then I know what it's like to completely reject those beliefs and start to think that maybe I was a fool for believing them in the first place. And I don't want to insult anybody who's Mormon who may be listening to it, let me speak right now, or any religion. This is just my journey, right? Other people's journeys may vary. I knew that I wanted to put those themes in a fantasy world where characters are faced with a myriad of religions in their world, all of them thinking that they're true, and characters basing life or death decisions off of what those doctrines teach them. And not only that, but how they judge other people around them who don't believe as they do, or how do they treat those people? Do they go to war with those people? Are they fervent believers? Do they believe to their dying breath? Or do some of them never believe? Maybe there's some characters that just never believe it, that from the moment they were born, they just think it's nonsense. And then there's their characters that believe wholeheartedly like me and then reject their belief later in life. Or are there non-believers that suddenly start believing? I wanted to put characters like that and sprinkle them throughout the story and see how they interacted with each other. Because I know how people have interacted with me as a believing Mormon. I mean, when I was out and I went on my 2-year mission to Connecticut and Rhode Island and New York, I know what it's like to be a true believer in something, to the point where you're knocking on doors in neighborhoods in Connecticut and Rhode Island trying to get people to join your church. And I know how people react to that. And sometimes the reaction is pretty, ignorant. I was insulted. I was told I was stupid. People would call the police on us because we're in their neighborhood. So I know what it's like from that perspective to be a religious person and be persecuted. And trying your hardest to convince other people that you're right. Like I did. I mean, that's what I did as a missionary, tried to convince people that I'm right and they're wrong and they need to change their ways or they're going to go to hell. I've done all that. I've also been on the opposite end of that now. Later in life, I'm like, man, I sure appreciate all those experiences I had as a missionary, but wow, I mean, I don't believe any of that anymore,
Yeah.
And I see people doing it and I'm like, now I'm on the other side. Now I'm the one thinking, are they idiots? I mean, what are they doing? What are they thinking? They're wasting 2 years of their life. It's kind of like, I don't know. I just wanted to incorporate that kind of opposite. I don't even know if I'm explaining this right.
I think it's a self-examination, right? Because you've seen it from all sides.
Yeah.
I have a pretty similar story to you. I wasn't Mormon, but I grew up in Pentecost and went door to door. Similar, and have found myself in a similar position as you now, and where you are. But that's why that's the number one thing I love about your books. Like I think that you did a great job of showing all faces of it. And the people who have the religious conviction of some of the acts that they perform, I believe in their conviction. It doesn't feel like just slapped on for effect. It doesn't feel like mindless criticism either. I think you do a good job of showing actually all sides of it. And I think it's a self-examination. I'm sure that you said when you sit down and you write these characters and you think about, okay, like in that time period, what did I think? Like, what would I have believed maybe?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've had some criticism on the books where people are like, these real people in life would never behave this way. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you've never been around a real true believing person. Because I mean, you think that, I mean, you know that people in our own world have done some crazy stuff in the name of their religion. And but if I put that crazy stuff in a book, suddenly it's unbelievable. Well, no, we see it in our own world. I just as far as the religions themselves, I wanted there to be a handful of different religions, all of them believing in ancient writings, ancient texts, like scripture, in other words, and they all had their own sort of scripture that they followed. But it was all sort of, I wanted it to be kind of similar, like here on Earth, on our planet, we've got these religions, the main ones like Christianity, Islam, Judaism. They all kind of come from the same place, they all kind of stem from the same stories, but they're so divergent in application today, you know what I mean? And I kind of wanted that to show in the books, where different people, the origin story is the same, but they're all interpreting it differently. And to the point where they go to war over it, and not just one war, but thousands of wars throughout time. They just fight and fight and fight over these beliefs. And I wanted to make them relatable to the reader, so I sort of based them loosely off of religious tenets that we kind of recognize in our own world. There's Mormons that read my book, and they can spot the Mormon parts of there's Catholic parts, there's Islamic references, and even Jehovah's Witness references. I mean, there's paganism for sure, witchcraft and Wiccan references. I try to sprinkle into these religions I've created. I've tried to sprinkle bits and pieces of our own religions just so people would kind of relate to it a little bit.
Yeah, and be able to connect to it for sure. Yeah, I think you did a fantastic job. Definitely my favorite religious exploration in fantasy, without a doubt. So, you know, for whatever that's worth, my hat's off to you. I don't know if my opinion means too much.
No, I appreciate the compliment. I appreciate the compliment.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I really want to talk to you, because I feel like we probably have a lot in common when it comes to, you know, the way we grew up and also the way we ended up going out into the world. So it's cool to get to talk to you here, and I love hearing about your process and how you implemented that. And you kind of said you knew the story needed to revolve around this. Did you know what you were going to do with the entire story? Like, did you have the ending in mind whenever you pinned the first few pages?
Yeah, I had some of the plot points. I knew how they would wrap up. One of the things that I did though was I kind of did you ever remember watching that show Lost?
Yeah, sparingly. Like, I remember it being on TV at a time, and I watched like an episode or two. I was always lost.
It's infamous for having all these different hooks. Like every new episode, they introduce 2 or 3 new plot points and really interesting hooks. Like, and then it's kind of infamous for dropping the ball and not answering many of those hooks. And I was worried about that because in my story, I introduce a lot of different stuff, a lot of different mysteries that need to be solved by the end of the thing, right?
Yeah.
And I will say that I'm pretty proud of the way that I wrapped up 80% of those storylines. I'm kind of worried how some people are going to take the other another 10% of them. And then there's probably about 10% that I was just like, I'm going to purposefully leave that as a mystery.
Yeah. Which is good because I think it keeps the world living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a few things that you're going to be like, yeah, but he never did tell me what that meant. And I'll be like, I know I didn't, because I have no idea what it means myself.
Someone will puzzle it out and somehow make it seem like you're playing 4D chess and that you have this master plan, and it all ties back to Memory Star and Thorn somehow and their connected universe, you know.
Yeah. Now to go back to an earlier question you asked, what am I planning on writing? Yeah, I do want to write well, I don't know if I'll ever do it, but there is a series of books that would be sort of a take some of the surviving characters from this trilogy, and they would go on a few little adventures, not life-changing adventures, not like epic end of the world type of adventures, but just little adventures. I'd like to do that, and the books would be smaller in size. Now I do have a pretty good idea of a prequel that I would like to do. And I think I would like to just do one enormous standalone novel that's a prequel. And then I've got ideas for one enormous standalone novel that would be a sequel. But they would not be direct I mean, they would be like separated by like 1,000 years of time. Like, I kind of want to do a prequel that tells the real story of Lejean and the precious Mother Mia and their son Rael. I kind of like to do just one big epic novel about that and how that really all played out. And then I'd like to do a sequel that's set about 1,000 years after the end of the 5 Warrior Angels, to see how, if history just repeats itself.
And maybe how old events have been misconstrued, and
yeah,
that could be a lot of fun.
I think it would be fun to the prequel I would like to do just because it would be fun to explore, because all these scriptures that our characters are reading in the 5 Warrior Angels, I think it would just be fun to play with that and see how way off the scriptures were from reality.
You could have some fun with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoy the multiple interpretations of old, scriptures and things found in records. And you play with that in Five Warrior Angels, and it really works for me. I'm thinking of other like major series that have impacted you as we're sitting here talking about like your plans. And Kate Elliott is someone that I've heard you mention before.
Yeah.
And I'd love just to hear about like the inspiration that Kate Elliott's had on you as an author, and maybe how you feel about her works, because I'm actually hoping to get to her. Is it Crown of Stars? Is that? Yeah, I'm hoping to get to that soon.
7-book series, The Crown of Stars, which is really great. Probably one of the top 20 fantasy series I've ever read. But yeah, her style and kind of what she was doing. In fact, my editor actually told me to reread The Crown of Stars and pay real particular attention to the way she was playing with religion in her books, and sort of he felt that she'd really done the job the right way, and he's like, I think you could fine tune a little bit more of your religious stuff if you just pay attention to what she's done. So she was an influence like that. She also wrote this science fiction series called Jaran. It's Jaran, and there's 4 books in that series. Really great space opera stuff.
Ooh.
And then she wrote a trilogy. I can picture I've got them up so I can picture the covers in my head, but it's a fantasy trilogy. People that ride big eagles. But it makes sense. It's not like Redwall. The eagles are big. The eagles, I mean, the people are normal sized, and the eagles are just enormous eagles, like in the Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
And they ride them.
That makes sense in my brain.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a great writer. And I've met her too, actually.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I had heard, I have a friend, Edgar. He's read your books and very much enjoys them, but he's also a massive Kate Elliott fan. And he said that if I enjoyed your works with, incorporating religion, then I would also really enjoy The Crown of Stars. So it's something that I've put on my TBR. I'm hoping for next year. We'll see. I'm reading, The Wars of Light and Shadow by Janie Warts, and that's a big series. So
yeah,
we'll
I just finished The Curse of the Mistrat. That's another review that's coming up next week.
Nice. I just finished it too a couple months back. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I had read that years ago when it first came out, and I remember really struggling with it back then. And I just set the whole thing aside, and I thought, I'm gonna get back into it. And so I just reread it. And it's interesting how you can read something when you're a teenager and it might be just too much over your head.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just kind of like, which is kind of my reaction the first time I read it. I just reread it and I loved everything about it.
Yeah. Jenny is doing a lot of things in that book, and her use of language and her vocabulary is nothing short of impressive.
Yeah.
I feel like I need a few more years and a couple more 100 books to appreciate some of the stuff that's happening in Curse of the Mistwraith as well. And I've heard the series really opens up to something pretty spectacular later on. So I'm excited to continue.
Yeah.
Let's see. I had a question from someone. Here we go. Fantasy Fanatic says, Brian, I heard your series compared to John Gwynne. Would you say it's a fair comparison, asking as a big John Gwynne fan?
Yeah. In fact, I did 2 whole videos about that comparison that I often get. Just type in my last name, Durfee, and John Gwynne, and you'll see those reviews. They will magically appear upon your computer screen. You type them into your YouTube search bar.
And these are not the ones with special effects, unfortunately.
No. I had been told by readers that I reminded them a lot of John Gwynne, and I heard it enough over and over that I decided, well, I'm going to read this guy and see what people are talking about. And I was like, oh yeah, I can totally see. Now in the videos that I made, I do kind of dissect where I think our similarities are and where we are different. Because I do think there are some differences. I think I'm more wordy than he is. I think I'm more garrulous with my descriptions. In other words, there were some characters that would come on scene in his books, and he would not do any description, if maybe just minimal. Every character in my book gets a lot of description.
Yeah,
I think that would be the main difference, you know.
yeah. I think also yours is a little more adult themed. I don't mean that YA, but I mean like kind of like the R-rated. You know,
Yeah.
Five War
Yeah.
Angels there's some pretty grim stuff in there.
True.
Whereas I would say The Faithful and the Fallen felt a little bit more of like a family blockbuster in some ways. Not young. I don't want to use that, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And they but both series play with prophecy and that kind of thing. But I can see the similarities, but they definitely stand alone. I think they stand apart enough to where
I think they both take place in sort of a gritty world that's realistically depicted. I mean, and the magic is pretty minimal. You know, characters just don't get to wave their Harry Potter wand and have things solved that way.
They deal with consequences.
Yeah, they got to work for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be excited to see how it wraps up, man. I'm very eager. And I wanted to ask this question. This is a very selfish question that I wanted to ask you. And it's is there going to be any sort of the story thus far to intro the Lonesome Crown?
No.
Okay. I was curious.
I know a lot of people want to, there's some authors that do that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if the author does that or if their editor does that for them. I can't imagine any author that I've ever met that would enjoy putting that together. I would imagine that if it's been done, because I know Tad Williams' Shadow March is that way. So are his other land books. They've got these lengthy what happened in the previous books that someone has written. I can't imagine any writer doing that willingly. It would have probably been put together by their editor or someone at the publishing house that did it. I was never asked to do it, and nobody ever did it for me.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people like that. I just didn't do it. Sorry. Sorry.
I'm trying to figure out if I have time to do a reread before Lonesome Crown comes out, because I read the book a little over a year ago.
Yeah,
and
I get it because there's so many series that I'm following right now where I'm just if there's several pages of what happened before, I certainly read it. I'm like, oh yeah, now I remember.
Yeah.
But if there's not, I don't get angry at anybody.
Yeah.
Because I understand how painful it would be to write an outline. Oh, just the thought of it makes me want to quit being a writer altogether.
So do you not heavily outline?
No.
Okay.
No, I've done, if anybody wants to know how I do it exactly, I do have a YouTube video, one of my writing advice videos. It's how, I think it's how I outline books. I think that's what it's called. I think the video is just titled Durfee Writing Advice Outlines. If you type those words into the search bar, it'll show up.
Nice.
But I go into about 20 minutes of how my books actually get written from start to finish. And it's sort of half outline, half making it up as I go. Yeah. But you'd have to watch that video to really understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage people to do that. I mean, I love hearing about process, and I'm always really thankful whenever an author like kind of lets down the veil a little bit, because there's some authors that keep it close to the chest. I know that you've put out writing advice videos. Christopher Rocchio was extremely forthcoming in his process and his ideas, as was Steven Erikson. Steven Erikson was, just a fountain of knowledge, really. And he said something that has resonated with me resonate with a lot of the viewers. It's probably like the most quoted thing I've ever done on the YouTube channel. And I asked him, I said, how do you get the pen to page? And he said, you have to kill the inner critic. You have to murder your inner critic and just write. And I like to ask anytime I have an author on, what led to you finally getting to that point where you could murder the inner critic and write and do that? And do you have any advice for people who are struggling to do that?
Yeah, I think I learned early on when I was doing artwork. For those of you who don't know, I used to do a lot of artwork. I did illustrations for Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons. I did a lot of wildlife and landscape art that I would sell in galleries around the Western United States. And I learned as an artist that nothing is so precious that you can't just take it outside and run over it with your truck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I've had beautiful, beautiful paintings that I spent months on just get destroyed in real stupid, bizarro accidents, And it's like, well, okay, I guess I got to paint more, right? I mean, that sucks, but it's gone. And whether it was a forklift driver at UPS that drove a forklift through it or something, you know what I'm saying? It's just, it's like, I'm like, yeah, okay. So it's not so precious that I need to just stop painting because one of my paintings got ruined, or maybe there's a lot of paintings that I would abandon. I'm like halfway through this painting and it ain't working out. Well, yeah, I wasted a lot of time, but why should I just keep struggling to make this work when it's clearly not going to work?
Yeah.
So I got rid of the preciousness of things early on in life because some paintings that I thought were awesome, the gallery owner would look at it and just be like, I'm not hanging that in my gallery. So you build a thick skin of people criticizing you early on. At least I did with my paintings, I just took rejection and disappointment as part of the business. So when I started writing, I wasn't holding on to every word with a death grip, like, I would, and like I said earlier, just throw every idea at the story that comes to mind. Just throw it in there. If it doesn't work, there's a delete button on your computer, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't work. Get rid of it. So nothing was ever so precious. I was never really handicapped that way. I know a lot of people start their books, a lot of writers, and this is a mistake that 90% of people that fail, they will write several pages and it'll be amateurish and first draft and they'll notice the mistakes. And so they'll go rewrite it and then they'll rewrite it. And they'll just sit and rewrite those first 2 or 3 pages over and over and over and over, and they'll never advance the story because that opening becomes so precious to them because they've worked on it so much. I don't even know if I answered your question at all.
No, I think you did. I think you did. I mean, it's the fact of not. I like what you said. You didn't like hold on to words with an iron grip, because I know whenever I write, I'm like, this sentence is not perfect. I cannot move on till this sentence is perfect, and it just kills all momentum. I mean, it just absolutely standstills you.
Yeah. If the sentence in your first draft, none of the sentences are going to be perfect, and I know that, and I realize that, so I'm not stressed out. I know that I can fix them later. I know that my editing eye is good enough that if there's a crap sentence in my first draft, I can rework it or delete it. I think the big problem with me was, and I mentioned this in the foreword of Blackest Heart. I briefly talked about this in the foreword to Blackest Heart. But when I was doing artwork, I also ran a carpet cleaning business at the same time. Because I was a struggling artist, right?
Right.
And so I would sell paintings here and there, and I would get a little windfall of money, or I would do some Magic the Gathering cards and get a little check here and there. but not enough to really live off of comfortably. So I did carpet cleaning and on the side. And like I told you earlier, when I was 12 and read The Sword of Shannara, I knew I wanted to be a fantasy author. And but it was just a dream. I never did anything about it. I mean, all through my teen years, I would take notes and compile notes and think of little ideas, but I never really started a book. And then when in my 20s, the same thing. I would think about it and dream about it, and one day I'm going to start, and I'll get those books. I'll start writing those books that I've always dreamed about writing. And then my 20s were over, and I still hadn't done anything. And then I was in my early 30s, and I was a struggling artist, a carpet cleaner. And one of the, and this is the part that I mentioned in the foreword of Blackest Heart. One of the clients that I cleaned for regularly was Utah Jazz point guard John Stockton.
Yeah.
And so this would have been in like the early 2000s, like 2001, 2002, 2003. I was just around 30 years old and hadn't done. I was just still dreaming of being a writer. Hadn't written a word. And I was in John Stockton's house cleaning carpets, as I had every 6 months for years. Usually he wasn't home. It was just be his wife at home or something. But once in a while he'd be home. I never really talked to the guy. He would just kind of always be in the background. But one day he pulled me into his den and he's like, "Hey, I've got this Oriental rug in my den. Will you clean it?" And he sat down at his desk in the den while I was cleaning this rug in the den. And I noticed his den had all these books on the shelves, like Lonesome Dove, Tom Clancy, the Da Vinci Code, like a lot of these books that I loved. And I said to him, "Hey, I've read most of this stuff. Do you read too?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I take those books. I take several books with me on all of our away trip, on all of the plane trips where we're flying out of town for basketball games. It's like I've always got a book with me." And so then we ended up striking up a conversation about books. And I'd never talked to him, and I don't think he would have talked to me at all if I talked basketball. But if I fangirled over him about basketball, I think he would have just left the room, right? But we were talking about books, and he actually ended up following me around his house as I cleaned from room to room, and we were just talking about books. And I made the offhand comment, "Hey, I always kind of want to be a writer one day. I've always dreamed of being a writer." And he just said, "Well, why aren't you?" And I was like, I said something stupid like, "I don't know." And, like, I don't know. But I couldn't stop thinking about that the rest of the day. I left his house and I had a few more carpet cleaning jobs that I was going to. And I just was like, because to him, he's probably thinking, he's a superstar, all-star basketball player. To him, he had a dream. He achieved his goals. He's probably just like, why the hell wouldn't anybody else do the same thing? If you got a dream, you work for it, right?
Yeah.
And I just couldn't stop thinking about that all day long. And, that night I got home and I started writing that night. And I've pretty much written consistently every day since.
So you write almost every day?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, there's some days that go by where I don't, but I don't stress about that. I don't have any goals or certain word counts that I got to meet. As long as, consistently I'm doing something,
Yeah.
But sometimes a day or two or three will go by where I don't. But yeah, I mean, that's, for me, it was the initial just sit down and do it.
Yeah. And be okay with it not being perfect. I mean, John Stockton being essentially the reason that I got to read Five Were Angels is such an awesome story.
Yeah.
It's crazy how one person can just change your life.
And I mentioned that briefly in the foreword to Blackest Heart. I don't think that guy would remember me if he saw me today, because that was a while ago. And then he retired from the Utah Jazz a few years after that. moved away from Salt Lake City, and he probably has no recollection of this event at all.
I'm sure there's a way we could tell him.
But it's just one of those things where it was a lesson to me also, and I tell this story a lot to the inmates at the prison, my story with John Stockton, because I try to tell you don't know what you might say at any given moment in time that will change someone's life.
Yeah.
And I don't think John Stockton thought he was saying anything life changing.
Yeah.
In fact, he probably was like, in his head was like, why isn't this guy doing his dream? Like, that's probably what he was thinking, right?
Yeah.
But, that's why you kind of always, I tell people, the world is a miserable place for a lot of people. And the last thing the world needs is for me to walk around being an asshole and making it worse than it already is for those people. And I try to teach that to the inmates too. It's like, make every interaction you have with other people something positive, so that when, because you don't know what dream you might spark in somebody.
Yeah.
Like John Stockton sparked in me. Because he could have been a jerk. He could have been an a-hole. He could have just not talked to me at all. He could have been like, I'm busy. What are you talking to me for?
Yeah.
But he didn't. He took some time, and it made a difference. And, just be the person that when you show up, that they're glad to see you. And not, oh, that jerk is here. Oh God, you don't want to be that guy, right?
No one does.
And that's kind of the philosophy that I try to live by and teach the guys that are incarcerated.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of talked about a butterfly effect earlier, but think about like Lonesome Dove linked you and John Stockton, which then linked you to writing a book that now inmates are you know what I mean? Like, it's just, you're right. I mean, you can never predict what can come of what.
Yeah.
That is super inspirational, man. Really is. I love what Lucas said here. He said John Stockton's greatest assist.
Yeah, add that one to the stats.
That one deserves its own category.
Yeah,
phenomenal story. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And as you were saying it, I was remembering the foreword from The Blackest Heart. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. We gotta shout out to John Stockton at the beginning of it. Nancy has something to say. She said, I just popped in to tell you, Brian Lee Durfee, that I love your booktube channel, your tutorial covering jackets and Mylar. Oh, she put a heart, and she put, I also own multiple editions of your books, waiting for book 3, back to work. So she's
Thank you.
Very cool.
Thank you. Yeah. No, one of my most popular videos is one of the videos where I showed people how I protect my books and keep them in mint condition.
I bought Mylars and watched your video.
Yeah.
I have to wrap my Rockio books because, man, those hardcovers are getting harder to find. Empire Silence is like $120. Like, that is wild. Absolutely wild.
Well, I'll let people watch the video. I talk about hardcovers and printing costs and how rare. I think it's not going to be too long from now where hold on to your books that you've got that are physical. That's all I'm going to say. And keep them in nice condition. Don't trash them.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys watched the video where I trashed the books.
Yeah.
Or dumped food on them. Yeah. Anyway, I can't remember what that one's titled.
Type in spaghetti mass market paperback.
Yeah. I can't remember what that one's titled. But I do. It's another one of my trying to be funny comedy sketch videos where I show people how easy it is to keep a book in mint condition and that you really have to work hard to be an idiot if you're going to destroy a book.
Ice cream sandwich bookmarks, someone said.
Yeah, exactly.
And you just sold another copy of The Blackest Heart. Holy Hearted said, Melissa said she just bought it on Kindle. So.
Oh, thank you. Yay. That'll
Excellent.
buy some treats for Miss Kitty.
Yes, and Miss Kitty needs all the treats because she's precious and adorable.
Yeah.
Man, I don't want to take up too much more of your time here on a Sunday night. I know that you got to mourn the loss of the Raiders today. Don't worry, my Browns lost too. We're in the same boat, man. I mean, what do the Raiders got to do? Like, what is it? Like, what are we going to do with the Raiders?
I don't know. I'll play it. I'll suit me up. I'll go in, coach.
Nose tackle?
Yeah, I'll do something.
I'll tell you what. I'll play wide. I'll play wide out.
Yeah.
Let's see if Carr can hit me in the hands. Let's just see.
Yeah, I'll go out there and play. If you want somebody, if you want to pay someone $19 million a year to go lose a bunch of football games, I can do it.
I'm your guy.
I mean, it's what they're paying the Raiders players to do.
Yeah, well, the Browns been doing it for 30 years. So, you know.
Yeah, sometimes I feel bad for being a Raiders fan, and then I'm like, well, there are people who like the Browns.
Yeah, it's been a rough life. Worst ran franchise, sporting franchise probably of all time. Legitimately.
Yeah, you don't even have a good mascot.
No, we don't. We're the Browns.
The mascot is a color.
We're the color.
Not even a cool color. It's not even a cool color.
We're turds.
Yes.
But our helmets are orange. What is going on in Lake Erie? What is in the water?
I don't know. Cleveland.
It's too cold there. Too cold.
It sounds like it's a sewer. I don't know. I just probably offended people in Cleveland. I didn't mean that.
They have cleaned it up a bit. It's a lot nicer than it used to be.
It's not like Oakland was ever a real
a treat.
Fantastic place.
Nice stroll down the Watts, you know. No,
that stadium in Oakland was literally built in a landfill of garbage.
Really?
Yeah, you would walk up to it, and it would just be choked with weeds, and people would just throw old toilets and refrigerators out off the road.
What?
Yeah, it was crazy. It was a dump.
That is crazy to me.
Yeah.
Wow. No disclaimer must be from Oakland or Cleveland. I feel attacked. It's all in good fun. It's all in good fun.
We got out of Oakland, moved to Vegas.
That stadium is beautiful in Vegas, by the way.
Yeah, Cleveland. The Browns got out of Cleveland and moved to Baltimore, which I don't know if that's much better, but
it's not. It's worse. At least they started winning some games, but
the only thing I know about Baltimore is what I learned from watching The Wire, and it doesn't look like a nice place at all.
Well, they did a pretty good job of portraying a lot of the issues for sure. Like without a doubt, actually, it's actually a fascinating to learn about, like the history behind it and the decisions that led to what it is today. Though it is a little better than it's portrayed in the media, to be honest with you. Like the media definitely runs with it a bit. But there's problems, you know, like any major metropolitan area. You know, there's always, when there's a lot of people around, there's just going to be issues. So I don't even know how I got into the fact where I'm defending Baltimore on a live stream of books, but here we are. But Brian, I don't want to take much more of your time. I know you're a busy man. You read like 100 pages every minute, right? Is that it? It's 100 pages a minute?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I really appreciate you coming on and doing this. You're my most requested guest, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm a fan of your YouTube channel. I'm a fan of your books. I'm a fan of your art. I love that you did MTG. It's just amazing. And I think that you are genuinely one of the most talented people I've ever had the pleasure of talking to and meeting. And it's just really inspirational to hear you talk about your story, what you came from, what motivates you, and who you are and what you've accomplished. So my hat's off to you. I am rooting for the Lonesome Crown to be #1 on Amazon on release day. And I know I'm going to be getting digital, physical, and audiobook. And all of you should too.
Yeah. Well, you do know that the Forgetting Moon was the #1 audible.com bestseller for the month of July 2019, right?
Even beating out Michelle
Obama's, yeah.
Michelle Obama. Yes.
Yeah.
That's so impressive. I mean, your audiobooks are fantastic, by the way. I mean, they're great.
Oh, and I do have a video coming up on my channel where I talk about the audiobook version too.
Nice.
That's going to be delayed a little bit. That's going to be delayed a little bit because the voice narrator couldn't really. Well, let's just say he's booked up for a bit.
Okay. Okay. Will it be the same narrator then?
I think so. I think that's why we're waiting.
Okay, good. Good. Because he does a fantastic job.
Yeah.
So,
but I have a video. I have a video about that coming out also soon. So.
Yeah, I have a good feeling that if you all haven't checked out The Forgetting Moon and The Black Start and The Lonesome Crown, that you would like it if you did. So I definitely encourage you to go check out this man's work. He's so talented, and I'm just so thankful for you to come on here and give me some of your time, man. Thank you.
No, I appreciate you asking, and I also appreciate your channel too, and especially when you talk about my books.
It's a pleasure, man. It's a pleasure. Hang tight here on the call, and I'll wrap this up here, but we'll talk a little bit after. But for everyone else in the chat, thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting. I have Brian's channel link down in the description. Make sure to go subscribe to that and be on the lookout for the Lonesome Crown releasing at the end of this month. And I will hopefully have you back on. I'd love to do this again. And chat, you're always wonderful. We thank you so much for being the third guest. And until I see you next time, be good, be safe. Remember to always keep turning the page.